So, did you go ahead and end up switching from the Hammerhead to the Nautilus? Yes, I did. There was always things that intrigued me about the Nautilus, and the only thing that really kind of pushed me back on the Nautilus, I think, like a lot of people, it was the 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 vastness of space and the fact that you only have 24 mines to cover that vastness of space. It seemed like kind of a blind spot in the development of that ship, and so I kind of was always looking at it and going like, I don't know. There's a lot of good things there. I mean, the idea of being kind of like an ambush predator, of setting traps for people, that sort of thing, obviously very appealing. And I spent so much time, experimenting with trade in the game, mainly to see how it works and what the realities are for the players who engage in it, so I better understand it when I'm trying to interdict it and steal from it. I could see the potential of a ship like the Nautilus. The problem was, of course, the problem of, geometric reality. So few mines and so much space to cover. How can you kind of bring these two things together? Certainly as a pirate, if you're being hunted by large capital ships and you're hiding out somewhere, being able to deploy a trap for anybody trying to come after you, especially if they're in a big ship, is going to maybe work in your favor. A lot of people might say, oh crap, well, you don't want to go after him because it's just going to be a trap. It's going to be an ambush, and you're just going to end up losing your ship, so you might as well leave them alone. That's kind of a good reputation that you want to build for yourself. It's just like, it's going to be expensive if you come after me, that sort of thing. And certainly the Nautilus appealed on that end, but it always came back to that geometric problem of how do you cover enough space and you only have 24 mines. So how did I get to the point where I've kind of gone, no, now I own the Nautilus. Now the Hammerhead is gone. I might have a loaner Hammerhead. I actually haven't even checked. But now I am the owner of a Nautilus. And it actually is a totally different ship. It's this ship here, the Mantis. Once I saw how the Mantis worked and how interdiction was being implemented in the game, I realized that CIG was effectively doubling down on their idea of, we want you to travel down certain corridors in the game. It's the only way that the Mantis makes sense. I think in the future we're probably going to get to a point where to travel in between planets, you're going to have to travel between two specific beacons, and it's going to create sort of like a spider web like pattern, not unlike Tony Zurovec's display of the living, breathing economy. It's going to create like a spider web like pattern of ships moving through the universe. They're going to want people moving in predictable ways across the universe. The Mantis requires that in order to be effective, in order to make sense. And so, armed with that, I kind of went back and I looked at the Nautilus and I said, well, shit. I mean, the Nautilus's drones recognize friend from foe. So if a Nautilus and a Mantis were to get together in space, along with a bunch of other pirate ships, and they were to lay a minefield somewhere at a point of transit in between two planets, you could effectively drop someone out of warp, out of quantum, directly into a minefield, and then pilfer the result. Interesting. And so, they've talked about different types of mines. They're still very limited. So I don't know that there are going to be definitely like EMP mines to totally preserve a ship, but that kind of ambush, that kind of thing seems very attractive to me tactically. If it does infringe on the profitability of the venture, it is certainly an effective tool to push people away from committing to hunting you down if they know that the moment that they drop out of quantum when they're trying to come after you, they're going to drop out of quantum directly into a minefield. Might serve as enough of a discouragement to allow you to continue on doing what you want to do. And so that was kind of what kind of sold me on it. The idea of floating around in the Hammerhead and just shooting things up certainly up front seems like a great idea, but the Hammerhead isn't all that fearsome of an opponent, as we have discovered. Whereas something like this, it has that certain insidious psychological quality to it. One of the other things that kind of sold me on this idea was the fact that when they were selling the Mantis, they were talking about ideally they want to have modules that you can put on other ships. Obviously, there's going to be some kind of a trade-off there, but modules that would allow other ships to effectively interdict as well, though the specific interdictor-style vessels would be the best at it. And I mean, the idea of being able to, potentially, possibly, maybe, who knows, interdict and lay a minefield with a ship, it's kind of like two birds with one stone. And that's, realistically, that is kind of how this kind of came to be, is I could kind of, with the Hammerhead, I could see myself going out there and, fighting in these, space battles and having some fun that way, but something that's potentially more practically useful, something that, even though you got this image here that shows like the Nautilus obviously engaged in some big space battle, I don't really think that the game is always going to be this, or it's going to necessitate this sort of thing. I think it's going to be more about situation to situation and stacking the deck in your favor as much as possible, and the big fleet battles are going to be something that you very rarely see, especially if you're a pirate. So an ambush predator style ship was more what I wanted to go for, and ultimately I was feeling like the Polaris was going to be more that thing, but the more I thought about it after the release of the Mantis, the more the Nautilus kind of seemed like, in my situation, for what I want to do, more of the logical choice. Now, ultimately, this choice does come with some drawbacks, and one of the big ones is that, the capital ship that you own, or semi-capital ship that you own, you no longer own. And, there is that, and that is a fair criticism, but at the same time, there are a number of problems with the Hammerhead, right? And we all know about them. I've discussed them many, many times. Gun racks, big one. But in the later ships, as I talked about in the Origin video, in the later ships, you often end up profiting from the mistakes in the earlier ships, which we end up making YouTube videos on, trying to get them fixed. Whereas the later ships kind of acknowledge those problems and fix those problems. So what problems exist with the Hammerhead, namely things like not enough gun racks, or any gun racks for that matter, for players to store the basic weapons that they use all the time when playing the game, to when the Nautilus gets built, there's going to be a sticky note on someone's desk. It's like, don't forget to put the damn gun racks on the ship, don't make that mistake again. And so ultimately I'll get a loaner of some type, and it'll probably be the Hammerhead. I still haven't really looked to see what that is, but in the end, this is going to be a ship that profits from the Hammerhead's mistakes. This is going to be a ship that learns those lessons. It's as much as it profits from the art assets that exist in the Hammerhead, that exist in the Idris, that exist in the Javelin. And it can kind of pull some of those assets together to make constructing the ship that much easier, that much faster. It also profits from all the logical mistakes that they make with the earlier ships. And they'll go, oh, remember, we learned that lesson with this ship, so we now got to remember to do this, and we got to now remember to do that. And so, in the end, ultimately, I think that this ship is going to end up better off in some functional areas because it is going to profit from all those earlier mistakes, whereas those ships may linger in limbo for a long time, waiting to see if those basic mistakes, if someone goes, you know what, let's just fix this. And that's often why, I kind of slip that comment in whenever CIG goes back and fixes something. I always say, you're welcome. And I'm not just saying that on behalf of myself, but I'm saying that on behalf of all of us who have to go out there and like bang the pots and pans together and make a lot of noise in order for CIG to kind of say, oh, you know what, instead of doing this thing and making this other ship that we're going to then sell, you know, we should actually go back and fix the ships that we've already sold. That's why I say that, you know. I noticed that somebody kind of picked up on that comment. I was like, you didn't do anything or anything like that. They, once again, not getting it. But ultimately, yeah, that is why, that is, well, one of the reasons why I picked up the Nautilus is because it's going to profit from all the mistakes that were made with the Hammerhead, and presumably, you know, there were mistakes that were made with the Idris and the Javelin as well, but, you know, CIG has kept those ships tucked away and gone back over them a couple of times that we know of since they have, you know, since they've been building them. So chances are, like, these later ships are all going to profit from those mistakes, and that is, you know, a good functional reason to pick up the Nautilus. But ultimately, if I was going to have a capital ship, I wanted to have a capital ship that, unlike the Hammerhead, had a lot of reach in terms of being able to not directly threaten a larger ship like an Idris, like a Javelin, but something that, you know, if you were to arrive in a system and someone were to say, oh, minion soldiers over there with a Hammerhead shooting things up, you'd be like, oh, well, let's go get him. But if you hear minion soldiers over there and he's in the Nautilus, then you kind of go like, oh, well, I don't want to fly into a minefield, so let's get a few people together. Let's get a recon element together so we can go and check that out and see what's actually going on, because we don't just want to quantum into a trap. You know, it changes the dynamic a little bit. And so I think in that time where they're sitting there going, oh, let's get these people together and let's get, you know, a couple of stealth ships in there to see if there actually is a minefield, and we'll see what's going on and blah, 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 blah. By the time they're done doing that, hopefully I'm finished doing whatever I'm doing and I've already moved on. And so that is kind of the reason behind it. Hopefully we'll see some EMP mines, you know, something like that to go along with it. Going to be very intrigued and definitely going to be following the ship very closely in the future. So that is, yeah, that is the entirety of my reasoning behind the purchase of the Nautilus. It was as an ambush predator and as a ship that I think has some obvious applications in piracy, though it could make the collection of goods a little bit messy. That, and hopefully, fingers crossed, a ship with gun racks.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.